Great. Thank you so much for having me here this morning. Thank you to Kristen and to Bethany. I want to say just a little bit about myself. So I've done a lot of presentations. I actually don't typically present on this topic, and so I'm actually looking forward to what I have to say. But I'm very glad to be here. I want to tell you that I'm married. We have 3 daughters. One is 29, that's the oldest, 27, and 21, hence the gray hair kind of thinning on top. And I can tell you I truly feel blessed. I'm used to being surrounded by ladies, right? So I'm very comfortable. I also want to let you know and kind of introduce Carla Ripley and Susan Botts at the very back, at the back table. So they are colleagues of mine. We all work at Heritage Professional Associates. It's a large group practice of therapists, and we do a lot of work with families and couples, individuals. There is neurotesting. There are all kinds of different services. And afterwards, if you're interested, we'll answer any questions you have. We have materials back there, so please browse, look, ask questions, whatever we can provide, we'll certainly give it to you. Good, I don't have to worry about blocking the screen, so that's good. Let's see, what else can I tell you? We have a dog, we have 2 cats, and 2 bearded dragons. I'm really glad bearded dragons don't fly. So, I also want to mention a psychologist by the name of Doreen Dodgen McGee. Anyone familiar with her? So she wrote a book called Deviced with an exclamation mark. She's a psychologist, a speaker, and of course an author. She's done a lot of work in this area, and I'm going to be referring to her from time to time. I really recommend that you look her up. You can find YouTube videos of her. I think her book is very good. You will find in your handout here a list of resources. I've included her in the resources, and if you go to her home page, she has a list of parental control apps, educational videos, technology tools. So I want you to know I do not consider myself to be an expert when it comes to all the video games and apps and things like that. Probably Carla and Susan could do a better job of answering questions about those than I could. But we're certainly going to be taking a look at the arena and the challenge that we have when it comes to technology and working with our children. Okay. I'm going to be dancing a little bit back and forth, so bear with me. Okay, good. So quick overview. The challenge and reality of technology, we're going to talk about it, the role of the parent, your values and goals. You know, so often we get so caught up in the day-to-day challenges that sometimes we lose sight of what it is we're really after and what it is we're trying to teach our children. We're going to talk about that. We're going to talk about balance and moderation, which is absolutely key with this topic. We're going to talk about the importance of structure and boundaries within the home. We're going to talk about communication. We're going to talk about evaluating your own home environment. So if we can stop long enough and experience that stillness, right, it might give us an opportunity to say, what does my home environment look like, and am I happy with this? Am I happy with the structure that we have in place, or is there a lack of structure? And then I'm just going to call it winning. What would winning look like with our children? By the way, I'm also going to talk a bit about what's going on in the brain. I am not a neuroscientist, but I do want to share with you some of the information that I'm coming across that I think is relevant to our topic. So the first thing I want to say is we know that technology is absolutely everywhere. It's like the air that we breathe. It's hard to go anywhere without being surrounded by it. Going to the gas station, right? There's little monitors already giving you sports updates and news. If you go to a waiting room at a doctor's office, right, very likely you'll see a TV. It's absolutely everywhere. Grocery check-ins. right? When you're checking out with your groceries, very often there's a little TV screen. A couple months ago, I was going out of town, and I went into the airport. And as soon as I got in, I had a choice between going to the kiosk to get my boarding pass or talking to a live human being. And fortunately, there was no line, which I don't think I've ever experienced at the airport before. And so I decided to speak to the live human being. And I got exactly what I needed, and I got my boarding pass. I went through security, and then I had time to have some breakfast. And I sat down at a table, and guess what's in front of me, right? A screen. And this is where I can order what I'm going to have for breakfast. So I started going through that. Of course, I ran into some difficulty, so I was able to talk to a live human being, and I was able to get what I wanted, and so I started eating. And meanwhile, the screen has images changing and flashing off and on, back and forth. Behind me, I have two huge TV monitors. There's also music coming from somewhere, and then there's the airport noise, right? And this is like the air that we breathe. We're used to it. I don't know anyone that would suddenly stop and go, "What's all the commotion?" Because we've become so accustomed to it. So one of the things I just want to be aware of with this is that we're used to, I'll just call it stimulation overload. We know that our technology is readily accessible. It's in the classroom, it's at home, it travels with us, of course. And we know that it has multiple functions. Right? Work, school, communication, social networking, creative endeavors. Anything we're doing very often involves technology, certainly entertainment. So let's take a look at some facts when it comes to technology. So our jobs and institutions depend on electronic technology. Who remembers the Northeast blackout of 2003? Does anyone remember that? Right, so it was a big deal in the news. It's the second largest blackout in history. It affected 8 states going into the Midwest. It affected 45 million people. And it also affected about 10 million people in Canada, in Ontario. It all started with a software bug in a control room in Akron, Ohio. So to think we're not dependent on technology, right? Our national security, our elections, again, everything, it's just around us everywhere. Okay, so pervasive need for constant stimulation. We're the most entertained and the most bored. That comes from Dr. Dodgen McGee. She talks about how we have all this entertainment, but that we're also bored. And she actually encourages people to learn how to be bored. Isn't that something? Which is really about stillness. I'm glad that was mentioned earlier. This comes from Common Sense Media, which is a good resource. You should have it in your resource list. I think they're a great outlet. And when they talk about hours daily online, they're saying teenagers spend an average of 9 hours a day. I find that hard to believe. I do believe that they come up with that number if someone's on multiple devices. So they've got their phone, they've got their laptop, right? I think they're adding everything together. Does that make sense? So I think that's how they end up with a higher number. But still, it's when you think about it, it's an incredible amount of time. For ages 8 to 12, about 6 hours, and under 8, about 50 minutes a day. American adults spend more than 11 hours per day. 11 hours. Watching, reading, listening to, or simply interacting with media, according to MarketWatch. According to the American Heart Association, children are spending way too much time in front of screens, and smartphones, tablets, TVs, and other screen-based devices are making kids more sedentary. According to Dr. Narula, who's a consultant with CBS, a physician, cardiologist, there's mounting evidence that screen time is associated with obesity. All right, ready for some more facts? Greater and faster access to information, we see that. Research shows changes in the brain from tech use. So I want to spend a little time on this. So dopamine is a neurotransmitter. It's a chemical in the brain. It's connected to the pleasure center of the brain. So anytime we do something that's pleasurable, right, dopamine is being released. It has multiple functions that are related to thinking, motivation, our emotions, being able to regulate our movement, and it's also the chemical that's being released with addicts, right? So people who suffer from addiction to substances, to pornography, in some respects, it's an addiction to the release of dopamine in their brains, right? So they're seeing this, and there are concerns about our children, right? What is happening inside the developing brain? So how long does it take for the brain to be fully developed? Does anyone know? Yeah, so most researchers kind of agree that up to 25 years. It could be less, it could possibly be a little more, but up to 25 years it takes for the brain to be fully developed. Most of that development at the end, in the later years, is in the prefrontal cortex. All right, so what do we know about the prefrontal cortex? So the prefrontal cortex is often referred to as the CEO of the brain. So what we're talking about is the ability to learn how to capture the big picture, how to assess risk, how to think ahead, problem solve. The executive functions that are developing in the prefrontal cortex are all of these. How to evaluate ourselves, how to set and achieve goals, how to regulate our emotions, our working memory, our attention skills, and learning how to filter out distractions, how to prioritize tasks, how to gain impulse control and discern good from bad. So all of this takes place in the prefrontal cortex. What we're finding with screens is that repetitive, and this is from Dodge and McGee, that repetitive exposures and responses to the screen can impact how the brain is wired. And what she's finding is that too much stimulation, and a lot of the research suggests that too much stimulation can lead to more incidents of ADHD in children, attention deficit hyperactivity disorder. So as we expose our children more and more to technology, now I want you to know I'm not saying we should wipe out technology, right? So this is really about moderation and about understanding that there's a threshold, that once we cross that threshold, we need to consider what are the effects going to be and that they could be detrimental. The brain is trained to expect constant changing stimulation. So if things don't change immediately on the screen, the brain is trained to look for something novel to attend to. This is how we are training young brains. And when this pattern is repeated over time, we no longer have the neurologically practiced skills of waiting and focusing. And I'll say that again, that we no longer have the neurologically practiced skills of waiting and focusing. All right, I have a lot to go over, so I know I'm going kind of quickly here. So, important, yeah? So, the concern here is that with the constant use of devices, it's bypassing the neocortex. So all these video games, whether it's an interactive form of media or a passive form of media, is not lighting up certain centers in the brain, and it's bypassing the neocortex, which means that those portions of the brain aren't being developed when the brain is engaged on the screen. And so it's impacting the ability to attend, to be still, to listen, to tolerate discomfort and distress. and also to learn in relation to others, right? Not to have immediate results, not to have quick fixes, right? The delay of gratification. Developing an internal locus of control happens in the neocortex. So that's the sense of control over one's life, that I can control how I live my life, that I can attribute my success to my own efforts, my own abilities, that I know how to center myself, ground myself, right? If I get kind of knocked off center, that I can find a way to bring myself back. These are all skills. All children in their development are learning these skills, right? And again, these skills are also, the neocortex is where the brain is developing those abilities. Okay, I hope I don't depress everyone by the time we're done here. So, interactive use is more problematic than passive use and lends itself more to addictive behavior. So, the TV would be passive use. Now, I have to say, passive use in many ways can be an issue as well if there's too much of it, right? Because when a person is sitting behind a TV monitor, the stimulation is all being provided for them. They're not being engaged in a creative way to create things on their own. Now, I know when our two oldest were growing up, we actually didn't have TV. I mean, we had a little kind of family room with a TV monitor and would have movie night, right? But we also had this great big chest of dress-up clothes. And so our girls were always dressing up and playing out all these dramas and asking me to be a part of it. And I got to play the pirate, I got to play the king, the prince, the queen, don't tell anyone, right? And so they were very creative. It was all about exploring. They did a lot of reading, and we did a lot of reading to them. Did you know that when someone is reading a book, it lights up all the centers in the brain? So that's really something, isn't it? I went to the doctor's office a few months ago. I had an appointment. I was waiting in the waiting room, reading. And then I got called in, and I saw my physician, and then I came back out, and I went to the front desk, and there's this young lady behind the front desk. She looks like she's somewhere in her 20s, right, maybe late 20s, and she compliments me. She says, you know, I thought that was really cool when I saw you in the waiting room reading a book. I've never been complimented for reading a book. I actually found it, I didn't know what to say. I mean, I don't remember what I said. But later on, I felt a little like, this is kind of scary. Okay. So research shows that violent video games increase aggression. So I want to tell you there's some real controversy about that in the research, and if you look up scholarly articles, you'll find that there's controversy about that. My opinion, I think it's an issue. I think it's an important issue. And again, you know, we determine the environment we live in, right? Your home, everything about your home, the pictures on the wall, the lighting, you determine what your home is going to feel like when you step through the door, right? And so in a home, if violent video games are part of the natural and normal environment, it's hard for me to see it not having an impact. Now, I want to say just a little bit about video games, and I'm certainly not an expert on all the video games. I'm sure you've heard of Fortnite, right? So Fortnite, we know it's not really that gory, right? It's not so gory. It's still violent. And for many kids, they're playing it all the time. And there are all these social networks, and they are just so tied into it. So there are a couple things that I tell parents about this. The first is I would not have children playing Fortnite if they're younger than middle age grades. Really up to 4th grade and maybe even 5th grade. Even 5th grade, I'd be almost a little hesitant, to be honest with you. Once you get to the middle school ages, I would say it's so important to have moderation be part of the time that they spend. and for them to be real clear about the boundaries. And we'll talk about that a little more. From what I see, games like Minecraft are pretty harmless. Recently, I had a client tell me that they enjoy playing Skate 3. Is anyone familiar with Skate 3? Right? So again, any of these can expose kids to others that are playing this game because they're so socialized now. I mean, there are all these social networks around them, so you don't know what kind of language they're going to be hearing. You don't really know what they're going to be exposed to. So being able to monitor all that, of course, is really important. Games that I completely X off the list, Call of Duty. So I was shown an introduction to that game, and I can tell you, had I included the clip in my presentation, Kristen would have said, no way, you're not showing that, because it is so disturbing. It is so violent, so gory. Grand Theft Auto 5, is anyone familiar with that? It has a torture sequence. It has a rape sequence. It's terrible. Okay. Whew. I get emotional just talking about this stuff. Now, just as a contrast, has anyone seen Won't You Be My Neighbor? So this is the Fred Rogers documentary. He was a Presbyterian minister. I don't know, a lot of people don't know that. It's an eye-opener. And if you want to reset perspective, go and see that documentary. It really gives you a fresh look at children and what we're doing today. It's such an incredible contrast. Okay. All right, tech advances we know happen very quickly. Let's spend some time taking a look at, so where do our families, where do our children spend time on their devices? So we know, right, these are all the places where they can spend time if they want to. It depends on the structure that you've created in your home. Mealtime, right, during class time, well, obviously that's not in your control. After school, after dinner, bedtime, right? So when we're looking at creating a structure, we're going to be looking at these different parts of the day, and certainly weekends and holidays. So what kind of concerns do we have? Well, the first is time spent on devices. This is not to vilify technology. Technology is a tool. When it's used well, it can be incredibly effective. Obviously, I'm using it today, right? The problem is when it's overused. The problem is when we're saturated with the overstimulation that it becomes a problem, right? So time spent on device is a concern. Blurred boundaries, no beginnings and endings. So you may know with Netflix, when you're done watching something, what happens? Right? Automatically, the next program is ready to start. Right? There are no beginnings and there are no endings. We have to create that for our children, because otherwise they don't know when to stop. Right? Makes sense? It's important to help secure those boundaries so that children know it's time for a break. Okay? Make sense? Lack of quality family time. So what I've noticed is when people are on their devices all the time, what's happening to the family time? The quality, the face-to-face family time. Right? It tends to go down. I can't tell you how many times I've passed a restaurant, say Panera Bakery, and I see a father with his daughter. I've got a picture in my mind right now, and they're sitting across from each other to have lunch, and they're both on their phones. And there's not that face-to-face. Just for children to experience the awkwardness in not having something to say to the person they're with. How often have you seen teenagers hanging out and they're all on their phones, right? They're texting. They're not even face-to-face with each other. And by the way, quality family time, when I talk about quality family time with families, so I'm talking about the individual time with each of your children, right? The quality time that the children have together to play, the quality time as a family, right? And what's the last one? if you have a partner, if you have a spouse, is just the two of you. Quality time that's just the two of you, right? A husband and a wife, the king and queen of their castle, and if they don't take care of their relationship, and if it's not strong and they're not collaborating, it's going to be a lot more difficult to support what's going on in the home and create a structure that everybody's behind when it comes to technology. Certainly distractibility, right? Teachers, grade school teachers are saying it's becoming more and more difficult to hold the attention of their students. Right? I think this is related to the use of technology. Okay, so safety concerns, unhealthy patterns, right? Eating, sleeping, compromised time for schoolwork. Obviously, if a kid is up all night on their phone, it's going to compromise their rest. Exposure to unhealthy and inappropriate behavior. Pictures and photos that we wouldn't want them seen. And cyberbullying. There is in the resource list, if that's something that's in any way an issue with any of your children, there's something called a cyberbullying toolkit that's on the resource list, and it's worth taking a look at. Certainly meeting strangers, because we don't know, right, who they're talking to. I think this is where looking at the parental apps and knowing how to monitor this becomes really important. And also knowing how to talk to your children about this, and we'll talk about that in a moment. So very briefly, because I don't want to completely depress you, so I'm referring to, so this is called lagging skills. And the term lagging skills I'm borrowing from Ross Greene, Greene. This is not on your resource list. He wrote a book called, it's a horrible title, even he admits it's a horrible title, The Explosive Child. Now, it's a pretty well-known book in a lot of circles, and because it's gone through so many revisions, he doesn't want to change the title because everybody knows it by this title. I think that's what's going on with that. But what he says is that if you get caught into thinking that your children are just acting bad at times because they're manipulative and they just want their way, you're missing out on the lessons they're trying to learn, the skills they're trying to learn. That typically when children are acting out, it's because they're struggling to learn a skill they haven't learned yet. And they need support in learning that skill. So examples of lagging skills would include lack of self-confidence, not trusting in one's own ability, a poor sense of self, a sense of insecurity, functioning out of fear, distrusting others, a sense of inadequacy, being over-dependent on others, low self-esteem, a sense of inferiority, lack of interpersonal boundaries, difficulty trusting oneself, role confusion, and difficulty fitting in. Now, I promise I'm not going to leave you here. I'm going to give you one more kind of slide. This is warning signs, and if you see warning signs such as these, this is really a good time to reach out for help, contact someone that can provide services that can really assist. If you have a child that's experiencing anxiety, depression, they're isolative, they don't seem to have friends, they seem very rebellious or aggressive, they're disorganized, they're easily distracted, so that might be a good time to come in and see someone. Anytime someone comes into the office, I consider that a sign of strength, not a sign of weakness, right? Being able to reach out for that kind of support is the highest form of independence, is interdependence. Interdependence is being able to draw upon the supports and the resources that surround you so that you can make yourself stronger and more self-sufficient. So why not? All right? So please keep that in mind. I want to talk a little bit about the fire marshal trap. So anyone ever feel like their job as a parent is to put out fires? And constantly you're just going from fire to fire, right? So this is a trap. Your energy is going into doing this over and over again, And and recognition that the child experiences becomes based on negative behaviors and outcomes, right? So it's entirely kind of a downward cycle. It's all negative behavior, and it reinforces negative attention-seeking behavior. And so you have these cycles and patterns that encourage them to be secretive, or what we're calling manipulative, or distrustful, like I can't trust you. And it sabotages trust building and quality time. Really good. And when I work with parents, I'm often working with them to pull themselves out of that kind of pattern and cycle and start to find a new way of spending time with their children. And, let's face it, and I want to tell you that in all the information I'm giving you, I really want to build on what you already know, right? I mean, there's incredible knowledge and wisdom here in this room. If we were to be paid for being parents, right, we would be billionaires. We'd be making so much money. So key to this, right, is that we want to focus on the values that we're wanting to instill in our children. And when we're playing, say, bad cop or fire marshal, right, it interferes with the values that we want to instill. We're not teaching anymore. And that's what we want to keep in mind. I encourage parents, anytime something's coming up or there's a situation, to really think about, what is my child trying to learn? And what is it that I'm trying to teach? Right? Rather than just reacting. Because that's when we go to sort of the emotional, sort of the limbic system in our brain. We get flooded with emotion, right? And now we're all upset. And the problem with that is when we get upset with our children, guess what message it sends to the child? Right? Who starts to feel responsible for the parent's upset? The child. So not only are they contending with what they did, because they, on some level, may very well know that what they did was wrong, right? They're contending with that. They're trying to figure out the skill. But then on top of that, they see the distress of mom or dad. And now there is this embedded message of, so you're responsible for making sure that I'm okay. You're responsible for taking care of my feelings. So who's responsible for your feelings, right? When I, parenting our children when they were younger, who was responsible for my feelings? Me. So it's going to really be important to take care of yourself and your own feelings, even if you know you're triggered and you need a timeout, or like in football, you're kind of handing off the ball to your partner saying, you take this, I need a break, I'll be back, right? Okay, very important. Oh, and of course it's not fun. We know that. Okay, so the 3 tasks of any parent, right? This is the real kind of core here. The first is to protect. So when I talk about protecting, right, we know what that means. It means providing a roof over their head. It means providing clothes and warmth and a sense of safety, a sense of security. I think that when children become overstimulated, they're more likely to end up feeling less secure because there's less of a sense of control, right? So there's the protection in terms of physical, right, safety and meeting their needs, and then there's the emotional protection, the emotional safety. When there's less stimulation, it becomes easier to learn self-regulation. And for you too, right? For you too. Okay, second task, to nurture. So to nurture means to empower, to facilitate their growth, to provide tools and resources and guidance so that they can thrive. To use your relationship, the parent-child relationship, to model and to teach open communication, active listening skills, that you're really paying attention, your own expressions of care and concern, how to resolve conflicts, how to learn responsibility and being accountable to oneself. Okay? So we want to empower them. Third task is to cherish. What does that mean? Right? I remember when our youngest was just a baby, there was a part of me at first that didn't want her to grow up. I kind of wanted to hold on to her. I said, stop growing. And one of the ways I was able to let go of that urge was simply to play sponge and just to absorb the joy that I was experiencing. And again, I think I said all three of my children have been real blessings for me. I've certainly learned a lot from them. I think among my biggest teachers in life have been my own children and my wife, right? And being able to enjoy the time that you have with your children, the true quality time. And once they get to high school, your time is going to be limited if they're going to be going off to college, especially in another state, right? You're not going to see them as much anymore. If they're a freshman, it may be that you have about 4 years, right? So I think you would want to enjoy the quality time that you have with them. Okay, is there anything else I want to say about that? I don't think so. All right, so let's take a look at developmental considerations. I'm giving you some general ideas here, but clearly the needs of children are based on their age group. So let's divide them into 5 groups, 18 to 24 months. Actually, really, I would say from birth to 24 months. 2 to 5 years. 6 to 12 years. 13 to 16 years. And 17 and up. So let's take a look at the professional recommendations to parents on limiting screen time based on age. So according to the American Heart Association, children aged 2 to 5 should be limited to 1 hour per day. Children, and I don't know how useful this really is, but this is how that children 6 and over should have a maximum of 2 hours per day. Now again, this is according to the American Heart Association. Now according to the American Academy of Pediatrics, this is from 2016, children under 18 months should avoid screen time. And I really back that up. I think that especially for babies, babies are learning to explore. They're learning depth perception. They're learning how to grab things, how to feel things, how to touch things. Don't give them a screen. It's too early. It's too early. 18 to 24 months, parents should watch with children so they understand the content. 2 to 5 years, limit to 1 hour of high-quality programs per day. Let's see, do we have another here? And 6+ years, limit times should be set and remain consistent. There should be consistency. One of the things I tell parents is that if you're going to create a structure at home, make sure you have your children's attention. If you're trying to do it when you're upset, like, oh, we're no longer having screen time at this hour. Right? It's more punishing than anything else, right? So what I encourage parents to do is have a family meeting. Now, obviously, if you have like older kids and younger kids, you might not necessarily have them in the same meeting. It depends on them and their relationship with each other, okay? But real good idea to sit down and really talk to them and say, look, we're going to do things a little differently now. And see if there's a way that you can bring them into the conversation so that they understand what the structure is, and then you can tell them what choices they have within that structure. Okay, role of parents. So let's take a look from the age of 6 to 12. Begin to teach how to use the devices. And I think the magic time, the best time to do this is going to be later in grade school, and starting in grade school, and then into ages, 12 and 13, because at a certain point you reach a threshold, 14, 15, where it's really going to be harder to get your child's attention on this. But if you're really teaching them early, you can engage their curiosity about this. You want this to be as collaborative as possible, because if you have their buy-in and they're understanding what you're saying, you're going to much more likely have success. Establish boundaries around tech use, when, where, and with whom. So if you have family dinner, I know when I was growing up, we had family dinner every night at about 6:30, somewhere, I forget now. I think it was about 6 o'clock. Now, I know a lot of families have trouble just being able to get everyone together for a family meal. If you have family meals, or when you have family meals, is it okay for folks to be on their phones? And remember, you're a role model. So if you're telling them not to, but you're bringing your phone, right, that becomes an issue as well. So in a family meeting, you can determine, look, this is how we're going to do it. You know, during family meals, we're not going to have our phones. We're not going to have any devices. It's just going to be us. You're going to have to look at my face. All right, instill early habits of moderation and screen time. Children need to have clarity on what the expectations are, and then you're there to support them in reinforcing those expectations and reminding them. Not necessarily yelling at them or, talking at them, but truly supporting them and understanding. And, clearly there are going to be power struggles at times. And I encourage parents to emotionally disengage in those times and stick with the business. It's a lesson for the parent in being firm and loving at the same time. Encourage entertainment as a reward, right? So one of the things with technology is that because it surrounds us everywhere, we have access to it all the time. It's on the phones. So, a long time ago, before you could play, you had to get certain things done, right? But now, it's so easy, it's so immediate, it's so convenient that it's easy to go straight to entertainment without having gotten any work done. So again, these are the kinds of values that you're trying to instill, that we're all, here to instill in our children, about a work ethic, about responsibility, about, hey, we have some tasks at home first before you do this. All right, how are we on time? Oh my gosh, okay. Foster open communication. Talk a little bit more about that. So from 13 to 16 years, so let me say something about fostering. I'll tell you what, I'll come back to it. Okay, so 13 to 16 years to coach and to guide. So this is kind of a general, from birth to, I would say, 5 years, primarily we're doing for our child. That's our role, right? When they're babies, we're changing their diapers, we're feeding them, we're providing them with the needs they can't provide for themselves. From ages 6 to 12, our role shifts to doing things with them, roughly speaking, right, 6 to 12, and then roughly speaking from about 13 to 16, now we become more of a coach. We become more of a guide. That's where we are here, providing guidance. And then by the time they hit about 16, 17, 18 years old, ideally your role becomes that of a consultant. So that if they have an issue or there's a problem, that they can come to you and ask for advice. And wouldn't it be wonderful for them to be able to turn to you? Okay? And ask questions. If something comes up and they see something in media and they find it disturbing, wouldn't it be wonderful if they felt comfortable coming to you and saying, I saw this image and I don't know what to do with it and I'm really confused about it, right? That would be a wonderful conversation to be able to have with a child. All right, so from ages 13 to 16, right, we're providing reassurance, we're clarifying boundaries, we're listening, we're doing a lot of listening. And then 17 above, right, we're being a consultant, we're promoting their autonomy, right, because we're preparing them to be young adults now. We're preparing them for that day that they say go to college. And we're reinforcing boundaries. And at this age, at this point, we're trusting in what we've taught them and what they've learned. Okay. Good stuff so far? Yeah? Okay. All right. So let's talk about boundaries. So when can devices be used? There's a boundary. How can they be used? So I've come across situations where a school called the parents because their child was using a Chromebook or something, but they weren't using it for school, right? They were using it for something else. Appropriate use of social media, all right, and device shutdowns. When do we actually shut down the device? I know for our two oldest, they had to have their phones. This was actually before all the internet went kind of crazy. They had to have their phones on the counter before they went to bed by 10 o'clock. And they knew that was the rule, right? Once they got to high school, that began to change because we could trust them. We could see that they were responsible with their homework. They really did want to go to bed at a reasonable hour, and it didn't become an issue. But prior to that, we needed to create that structure for them. All right, more on boundaries. Screen-free zones at home. Do you have a zone at home that simply should be free of any screens or devices? Limitations on content, obviously. So the violence, pornography, a younger child observing an older sibling on something that's going to be difficult for them to understand. So these are the kinds of things, obviously, we want to attend to. And the quality family time is clearly defined. All right. So, yeah, please. Oh, we have 5 minutes. Okay. I thought you were waving to me. Okay, so, we always want to come back to what is it we're really aiming for? So I have to accelerate this now. So values and goals. So these are the kinds of things we're looking at. I'm going to do it kind of quickly, right? So healthy curiosity, trust in oneself to learn, personal autonomy and independence. So these are the kinds of things that, right, this is what we're after. Let's not lose sight of what this is all about. What is it that we are truly aiming for here? Additional skills and goals, how to be organized, leadership skills, taking initiative, decision-making, a sense of identity, intimacy with others. So again, I'm sorry to go through that so quickly, but these are the kinds of things, right, that are important to us. So technology and growth opportunity, right? So we want to educate them about social media. We want to supervise. We want to use parental controls. We want to teach them how to have safe and creative exploration, shared experiences, and clarity. I've already said that. Okay, good. So teamwork, collaboration is key. Evaluate with your partner, your home tech environment, and agree with your partner on a plan. Right? Obviously, this is more challenging for single parents, right? But if you have a partner, make sure that you're together. All right, and communicate to your children and invite their involvement. Okay. Again, I'm sorry to be going so fast now. This happens a lot to me when I train. I end up with too much. Reinforce boundaries, play by the same rules, be clear on consequences of misuse, and model what you strive for. When it comes to consequences, please don't take your child's phone away for a week or a month or indefinitely. That punishment, it's a bit of a myth. Punishment does not teach children, right? There are natural consequences. It can be enough of a consequence for a child not to have their phone that evening if something went wrong, and to come back to you and be able to talk about what happened to get their phone back. Okay, so I would just be mindful. I would be mindful of that. Okay, communication tips. Please talk to your child. If you start lecturing, guess what they do? They turn off, right? So you really want to be talking with them. Remember the dynamic between being reactive and being responsive. When you're reactive, it's emotional, it's defensive, it's argumentative, right? It's got this like driving force behind it that's kind of generated by, very often by fear, right? Whereas when you're being responsive, it's a lot slower. You're slowing things down. When you're reacting, it tends to go fast. When you're being responsive, you're finding a way to slow it down and really attend to your child and really listen and ask questions and acknowledge and let them know you're listening for their experience and that you understand. Because what would you want your child to say by the time you're done talking? Gosh, Mom really understood what I was saying, right? All right, avoid communication blockers such as lecturing, giving shaming messages. Anytime you say something that could be naturally followed by the words shame on you, you've sent a shaming message, okay? So I'm going to say something. If it sounds like a shaming message, I want you to say out loud, shame on you. Okay, you ready? All right. Why are you texting when I'm talking to you? Who spilled this milk? How could you be so rude? You know, it's really hard to get your attention when you're texting. Can you just put that down so I can talk to you? Right? It's no shaming message. So again, I would be aware of shaming messages. Also, if you're addressing something, I call it popcorn. Don't play popcorn. Like if there's something specific you need to address with your child, keep it on that. Right? So it doesn't become, and you don't take out the garbage, and you don't walk the dog, and you, right? So, right, one at a time. And if it's something that's really important, I know with our own children, what I would do is I would say, look, we need to, I want to sit down and talk with you. Did I do something wrong? No, you know what? Let's just go over to the living room and sit down. And it's a real sit-down conversation. It's not a sudden, over-the-counter, going back and forth. It's sitting down and saying, look, I really want your attention on this. This is important. Do not set rules or guidelines in the heat of an argument. And be clear on your specific message before you talk.